The dinner table fell silent, not because of the roast chicken my mother had spent hours preparing or the flickering candles that made everything feel too formal. No, it was because of what my father had just spat across the table. "You're the biggest failure in this family," he said, his voice thick with disgust. "You were a mistake." His words landed like blows. Everyone sat frozen. My cousins, too stunned to chew. My aunt dropped her fork. Even my brother, always the golden child, shifted in his seat but said nothing. I sat at the far end of the table, not because there was no space, but because they always made sure there wasn't any near them. I blinked once, then twice, holding back the sting in my eyes. I would not give them my tears. Not this time. The only sound was the soft clink of my grandfather's cane tapping the floor beside his chair. Tap, tap, tap. And then slam. The old man, now nearing 90, but still fierce in presence, stood up so suddenly even the dog beneath the table whimpered. His cane smacked the marble floor like a judge's gavel, making everyone jump. "Enough," he thundered, voice echoing through the lavish dining room. "It's time you all learn the truth." My father opened his mouth to retort, but Granddad cut him off with a raised hand. The room felt like it had stopped breathing. "You all think she's a mistake," he said, eyes scanning each face. "You think she's the failure?" He pointed his cane right at me. "That girl is the only one in this room who reminds me of what this family once stood for. The only one who still carries the legacy I built with these hands." A crack of silence followed. Then he turned to me. "Child, tell them what you told me last week." I hesitated, heart pounding, hands trembling in my lap. I hadn't meant for anyone else to know. But he nodded at me gently, and something in his eyes told me this was my moment. My voice was weak. I cleared my throat. "I saved the family business from collapse. 3 months ago. I didn't tell anyone. I bought out the debt under a different name." Gasps. My uncle leaned forward. My father stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. "I didn't do it for recognition," I continued. "I did it because it meant something to me. Because Grandpa's work means something to me." The weight of that confession sat in the air. My father's voice broke the silence, hoarse now. "That's not possible, you don't even." "I taught her," Grandpa said sharply. "For the past 2 years. Every weekend. Business, contracts, negotiation. While you were all too busy pretending she didn't exist, she was learning how to lead." And just like that, the room shifted. My cousin pushed his plate away. My brother was pale. My mother sat frozen, mouth parted in disbelief. I looked down at my plate, barely touched. For the first time in years, the silence was mine. But the story was only beginning, because what my grandfather said next was a truth that would leave them all shattered. And I hadn't seen any of it coming. My grandfather reached into the inside pocket of his worn, gray blazer, the same one he always wore to family events but nobody ever respected him for. With deliberate hands, he pulled out a folded, slightly yellowed envelope and placed it on the table. He didn't say anything, just slid it across the polished surface until it stopped in front of my father. "What's this?" my father scoffed, still trying to claw back some control. "More of your—" "Open it." Grandfather's voice was quiet now. Not loud, not angry, but somehow more powerful than any scream. The air felt electric. My father reluctantly opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was handwritten, my grandfather's cursive, neat and careful. I saw my father's eyes widen with each word he read. His hands, once clenched in arrogance, now trembled slightly. "I wrote this 25 years ago," Grandpa said, turning his gaze to the rest of the table. "When your mother was pregnant with her second child. You all assumed the child was an accident. A mistake. But it was no accident." I froze. He looked at me then. Not with sadness, but with a fierceness I didn't know he still had. "She was the child I begged them to have." Gasps echoed. "I was dying then," he continued, "or so I thought. Doctors gave me months. Asked them to give me something to live for. A legacy. They had you, son," he nodded at my father. "But I asked for one more. A child who wouldn't grow up entitled. A child raised humbly, away from all this noise. Someone who could carry forward the values this family has long forgotten. You were born 6 months later, he said, turning to me. And the day I held you in my arms, my condition reversed. He laughed under his breath. They called it a miracle. I call it a second chance. My mouth parted. My chest tightened. You never told me this, I whispered. Because it wasn't time, he said, his eyes glistening. But it is now. The entire table was stunned into silence. Even my mother's usual resting smug face was now unreadable. My brother's smirk had vanished completely. My father looked like he'd swallowed fire. So you planned this? I prayed for her, Grandpa snapped. And I kept praying. I watched you all push her aside, humiliate her, underestimate her. I said nothing, because I wanted to see if her spirit would break. His voice cracked now, raw with emotion. But it didn't. She stayed kind. She stayed strong. Even when you called her names. Even when she worked jobs beneath her. Even when she sat at this table like a ghost. He turned to me. I'm sorry I didn't step in sooner. I shook my head. No, you were always there in your own way. And suddenly, it wasn't just my father who looked ashamed. My cousins stared at their plates. My uncle's lips moved, as if wanting to speak, but nothing came. But it wasn't over. Because the truth, that letter, that was only one part of what had been buried. There was still something even I didn't know. Something that would change everything. My grandfather took a long breath, steadying himself on his cane before slowly lowering back into his chair. The weight of what he'd revealed still hung heavy in the air. You could hear the ticking of the wall clock, the nervous clink of someone's spoon against china. But he wasn't done. There's something else, he said softly. Something none of you know. He looked across the room, to the cabinet in the corner, the one we all thought was just for dusty photo albums and forgotten war medals. Bring me the black folder, he said. My younger cousin obeyed, without a word. Moments later, the thick leather folder was placed on the table. Grandpa opened it slowly, revealing pages of neatly clipped legal documents. This, he said, laying it flat, is my will. My father's face paled. You already have a will. We all saw it last year. No, Grandpa replied. You saw the one I wanted you to see. The real one was updated 6 months ago. Why? My aunt whispered. Why would you hide that from us? He didn't answer her. He turned to me. I made changes the day she saved the company. My heart skipped. You mean? Yes, he said. You're the sole heir now. The table erupted. My uncle stood. That's absurd. My aunt gasped. She's not even qualified. My brother shouted. She's a waitress. But my grandfather slammed his palm on the table. Enough. She's the only one who deserves it. I watched each of you squander opportunity after opportunity. You used my name for credit, for status, but none of you ever earned it. He turned to my father, eyes sharp. You taught your daughter shame. I taught her strength. And now she will carry this name forward. I sat frozen, the words not yet sinking in. Me? The heir? The one they said didn't belong? You made me executor of the fake will, my father growled. I made her executor of the real one, Grandpa snapped. You just didn't know. My father's fists clenched at his sides, but he said nothing, because deep down, he knew he had lost. Still, I wasn't gloating. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt whole. For the first time in my life, I felt seen, valued, like I hadn't lived in the shadows for nothing. But even as I tried to process it all, my grandfather looked at me with a glint in his eye. There's one more thing I need to show you, he said. And that's when he reached beneath his chair and pulled out a small wooden box. The same box I once saw him crying over, years ago, when he thought no one was watching. And what was inside that box would rewrite everything I thought I knew about my place in this family. The old wooden box creaked open in my grandfather's trembling hands. It looked ordinary on the outside, plain wood, no locks, no carvings. But I knew better. I remembered being 8, wandering into his study, seeing that box half opened and catching a glimpse of photos and letters before he shut it fast and told me gently, "One day, you'll understand." That day had finally come. He set the open box on the table in front of me. "Go on," he nodded. "This belongs to you." I hesitated, my fingers brushing over the lid. Inside, there were letters tied in faded twine, yellowed photographs, and a small velvet pouch. I took the first letter and unfolded it. My mother's handwriting. I glanced up, startled. She was looking at her plate, her face unreadable. The letter was addressed to my grandfather, written the day I was born. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," it read. "I'm scared. But she has your eyes, Papa, and your fire. If I fail, please raise her right. Not to be rich, not to be perfect, but to be kind." My throat tightened. Beneath that were photos, me at age 5, holding Grandpa's hand outside the grocery store, me with paint on my cheeks during a school art competition, me asleep on his chest while he read some dusty old book. He had kept everything. "I never showed these to anyone," he said quietly. "They would have laughed, mocked you more, but I kept them. Because every time you smiled through their cruelty, I saw hope." I opened the velvet pouch. Inside was a gold pendant, tiny, delicate, engraved with one word, legacy. My hands trembled. "You gave this to Grandma," I whispered. He nodded. "And now I give it to you." I looked up, eyes blurry. "Why me?" "Because you listened. You learned. You never took shortcuts. You never needed praise or money to do what was right. And that's what leadership is." Across the table, the silence was no longer contemptuous. It was uncomfortable, shameful. But I didn't want revenge. Not really. That wasn't the point. I stood up, took a deep breath. Grandpa's will stands. That's not changing. But I'm not kicking anyone out. I'm not taking anyone's house or business titles. Everyone blinked. Even Grandpa looked surprised. "I'm not here to punish you," I said, eyes locking with my father's. "I just want you to know, I didn't fail. You did. You failed to see me. And that's a burden you can carry." Then I turned to Grandpa. "But I see you. And I'll protect what you built. Not just the business. The heart of it." He smiled then. A small, proud, bittersweet smile. And in that moment, the weight I had carried for decades slipped off my shoulders. But even as I thought the storm had passed, Grandpa cleared his throat. "One more thing," he said softly, "before I go." He reached into the box again and pulled out an old, sealed envelope. "This isn't about money," he said. "It's about blood." And what was written in that letter would explain why my father always hated me. The envelope looked older than the rest. Its edges were brittle, the seal faded but still intact. My grandfather held it gently in his weathered hands, like it contained a heartbeat. "This," he said, "was never meant to be opened unless absolutely necessary." Then he looked me dead in the eyes. And tonight is that moment. I swallowed hard, my heart thudding in my chest. Every eye in the room was on us. No one moved, no one spoke. My father's face had gone ghost white. My mother sat rigid, like she already knew what was inside. With a slow breath, Grandpa opened the envelope and pulled out a single page. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice was firm. He began to read aloud. "To my beloved father. If you're reading this, then the secret I carried with me all these years must now see the light. The truth is, the child I gave birth to on that cold November night was not James' daughter. She is someone else's." Gasps erupted around the table. My breath hitched. My stomach dropped. He was kind, gentle. A man I met before the marriage was arranged. We only had a few weeks, but I never forgot him. And when I found out I was pregnant, I knew it wasn't James. I was scared. But I was also certain that this child would be my redemption. A new beginning. The room was spinning. Grandpa looked up at my father. "She's not your biological daughter." My father stood abruptly, chair screeching. "Lies. You expect me to believe this now? After all this time?" Grandpa didn't flinch. "I had the DNA test done last month. Quietly. I needed to know before I gave her everything. He handed the sealed lab report across the table. My father stared at it like it might burn him. You hated her, Grandpa said, voice cracking. Because somewhere deep down you knew.
But none of that matters now.
Because blood isn't what makes someone family. Choice does. My mother finally spoke, voice barely a whisper. I loved him, but I stayed for the sake of this family. I never told her because I didn't want her to feel like less. I stood slowly. My knees were weak, but my voice didn't falter. I never needed to be your daughter, I said to my father. I just wanted to be a part of this family. I gave everything I had for it, even when you gave me nothing.
He didn't respond.
His pride was crumbling, but he couldn't say a word. I turned back to Grandpa. What do I do now? I asked. He looked at me, eyes filled with love and gravity. You lead, he said. You heal. And you build a future that's better than our past. And I did. In the weeks that followed, I took the reins of the company, not with vengeance, but with vision. I brought in programs to help struggling employees. I started scholarships in Grandma's name. And slowly, the family that once mocked me began to see me. My father never apologized. But one day, he left a note on my desk. You've done more for this name than I ever did. Maybe that's what scares me the most. I smiled. Because in the end, it wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that I was never a mistake. I was the miracle they didn't deserve, but the one they needed. And that truth? It set everyone free.
The roar of motorcycles echoed through the dense forest as two terrified young women stumbled over uneven ground, their breaths ragged and their faces streaked with tears. Sophia and Emma, daughters of a tech billionaire, had taken a detour on their way to a retreat, only to fall victim to a group of bandits targeting wealthy travelers. Their SUV had been forced off the road, their driver overpowered. Now they were running for their lives. Keep moving, Sophia urged, pulling her younger sister by the arm. Emma, though exhausted, pushed herself forward, her heart hammering in her chest. The bandits were closing in. Their gruff voices carried through the trees like the growl of wolves hunting prey. Suddenly, the two sisters burst into a clearing. Standing before them was a man, lean and rugged, with eyes sharp as steel. His clothes were simple, patched in places, but his presence was commanding. This was Daniel, a kind-hearted but impoverished man who eked out a living gathering herbs in the forest. Before the sisters could explain, the first bandit charged into the clearing. Without hesitation, Daniel stepped forward. "Stay behind me," he ordered. The girls froze, unsure if the stranger could help against the 5 men who emerged from the trees, armed with knives and clubs. Daniel had no weapon, only the resolve of someone who had faced life's harshest challenges and refused to back down. "What do you want?" Daniel asked, his voice steady but cold. The leader of the bandits smirked. "Those two. Step aside, hero, and you won't get hurt." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Not happening." The bandit lunged, but Daniel moved like a coiled spring. In one swift motion, he sidestepped, grabbing a fallen branch from the ground. The makeshift weapon cracked against the attacker's arm, sending him reeling. The other bandits closed in, but Daniel fought with a ferocity born of necessity, using every ounce of his strength and wit. Sophia watched, her fear giving way to awe. There was something magnetic about this man, his courage, his selflessness. Her heart raced, not just from the danger, but from something she couldn't yet name. As the fight raged, Daniel sustained cuts and bruises, but he refused to yield. His determination unnerved the bandits. One by one, they faltered and fled, leaving their leader behind. The last man standing stared at Daniel with hatred but also fear. Finally, he spat on the ground and disappeared into the woods. Daniel dropped the branch, his chest heaving. "Are you two all right?" he asked, turning to the sisters. Sophia stepped forward, her voice trembling. You saved our lives." "Thank you." Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. "We thought we were going to die." Daniel offered a faint smile. "You're safe now. Let's get you out of here." Daniel led the sisters through the dense forest, retracing his mental map of trails and hidden paths he had learned over years of foraging. As the adrenaline of the fight faded, pain surged through his body. His shirt, tattered and smeared with dirt and blood, stuck to a gash on his side, but he pressed on, unwilling to slow down. Sophia noticed his labored breathing and reached out to steady him. "You're hurt," she said, her voice heavy with concern. "It's nothing," Daniel replied, his tone firm but kind. "We need to get you two to safety first." Emma looked over her shoulder, fear still evident in her eyes. "What if they come back?" "They won't," Daniel assured her, though he tightened his grip on the branch he still carried, just in case. After what felt like hours, they emerged onto a dirt road. The sisters' SUV sat abandoned nearby, its windows shattered, but the vehicle itself was intact. Daniel inspected it quickly, finding the keys still in the ignition. "You're lucky they didn't take this," he said, opening the door for them. Sophia hesitated, turning to him. "What about you? You're coming with us, right?" Daniel shook his head. "This is where we part ways. You'll be fine from here." Sophia's eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't just walk away. You're bleeding. At least let us take you to a doctor." "I'll be all right," Daniel said, stepping back. "Just drive. Get somewhere safe." Sophia opened her mouth to protest, but Emma tugged at her arm. "Sophia, let's go. Please." Reluctantly, Sophia climbed into the SUV. As the engine roared to life, she leaned out of the window. "Thank you, Daniel. I won't forget this." He nodded, watching as the vehicle disappeared down the road. Only then did he allow himself to collapse onto the grass, exhaustion overtaking him. Meanwhile, back at their father's sprawling mansion, the sisters burst through the doors, frantic and shaken. Their father, Richard Belmont, a towering man with a commanding presence, rose from his armchair, his face etched with worry. "Where have you been?" he demanded, rushing to embrace them. "I've had the police searching everywhere." Sophia and Emma recounted the harrowing events, from the bandits to the mysterious man who had saved them. Richard listened, his expression darkening with every detail. "He saved us, Dad," Sophia said, her voice trembling. "If it weren't for him, we'd be dead." "Who is this man?" Richard asked. "What's his name?" "Daniel," Sophia replied. "He didn't tell us much else. He wouldn't even let us help him." Richard's jaw tightened. "Then we'll find him. A man like that deserves more than just our thanks." The next day, Daniel awoke in his small cabin to the sound of knocking. Groggy and still sore, he opened the door to find two men in suits standing on his porch. "Daniel?" one of them asked. "Yes," Daniel replied warily. The man extended a hand. "We're representatives of Richard Belmont. He'd like to meet with you." Daniel frowned. "Why?" The second man smiled. "Let's just say he's very grateful for what you did." Hours later, Daniel found himself standing in front of a mansion that looked like something out of a dream. The opulence was overwhelming, and he felt out of place in his simple, threadbare clothes. Inside, Richard greeted him with a firm handshake. "You're the man who saved my daughters," Richard said, his voice warm but commanding. "I owe you everything." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "I just did what anyone would have done." "Don't sell yourself short," Richard said. "Courage like yours is rare. I want to reward you." "I don't need a reward," Daniel said firmly. "I only did what was right." Before Richard could respond, Sophia entered the room. She froze when she saw Daniel, her heart skipping a beat. He looked different here, still rugged but somehow more vulnerable. Their eyes met, and an unspoken connection passed between them. "Daniel," she said softly, stepping forward. "You came." He nodded. "Your father insisted." As the conversation continued, Sophia found reasons to linger near Daniel, her feelings growing stronger with every passing moment. He was unlike anyone she had ever met, humble, brave, and unshakably kind. Over the following days, Richard tried to offer Daniel money, a new home, even a job in his company, but Daniel refused all of it. He wasn't interested in wealth or luxury. What he couldn't refuse, however, was Sophia's presence. She sought him out constantly, drawn to his quiet strength and the warmth in his eyes. One evening, as they walked together in the mansion's sprawling gardens, Sophia finally confessed her feelings. "I can't stop thinking about you," she said, her voice trembling. "You're the kind of man I've been searching for my whole life." Daniel stopped, his heart pounding. "Sophia, I'm not." "Don't," she interrupted, placing a hand on his chest. "Don't tell me you're not good enough. You've already proven you are." Tears welled in Daniel's eyes, the weight of his struggles momentarily lifting. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that happiness might be within reach. The wind whipped through the roadside trees, hurling leaves across the empty stretch of highway. Ellie tightened her jacket around her as she jogged along the cracked asphalt, clutching a bag of tools. The roar of a distressed engine broke the stillness ahead, and as she rounded a bend, the sight of a sleek black car, hazard lights blinking, greeted her. A man in a crisp navy suit stood beside the vehicle, his phone pressed to his ear. He was pacing in frustrated circles, muttering under his breath. "Of all days, no, I don't want excuses. The meeting starts in 30 minutes. Figure it out." His voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. Ellie hesitated, scanning the scene. The man's polished shoes were far too clean for someone accustomed to roadside repairs, and his tie was loosened just enough to suggest desperation. She adjusted her tool bag strap and approached cautiously. "Hey," she called, her voice clear over the wind. "Need help?" The man turned sharply, his piercing blue eyes narrowing as they fell on her. For a moment, he seemed ready to dismiss her, but then his gaze shifted to the battered bag slung over her shoulder. "Unless you're a mechanic, no offense, but actually, I am," Ellie interrupted, flashing him a confident grin. "Well, sort of. I work at a garage in town. Looks like your engine's giving you trouble. Mind if I take a look?" The man hesitated. He glanced at his watch, then back at Ellie. "Fine. Just, please, if you can get it running in the next 20 minutes, I'll pay you whatever you want." Ellie smirked, dropping to her knees beside the car. "Let's see what we're dealing with first." Ellie popped the hood, and a puff of steam billowed out, making her cough. She waved it away, peering into the tangle of components. The engine looked like it belonged to a spaceship, with wires and panels she hadn't seen often, but nothing she couldn't handle. She glanced up at the man, who was pacing again and mumbling something about contracts and boardrooms. "Nice car," she said, letting her voice cut through his muttering. "But I'm guessing you haven't had it serviced in a while. Is that important right now?" he snapped, then sighed heavily. "Sorry. This meeting is critical. My entire year rides on this presentation." Ellie chuckled, grabbing a wrench from her bag. "Relax. We'll get you there. What's the worst that could happen? They start without you." His sharp glare softened slightly, as if her calm demeanor was contagious. "Let's just say that's not an option. My name's Logan, by the way. Logan Price." She nodded, more focused on tightening a loose belt she'd spotted. "Ellie, nice to meet you, Logan." She paused, wiping her hands on a rag. "Though I'd prefer to meet under less stressful circumstances." Logan gave a short, humorless laugh. "Agreed." Ellie worked quickly, her hands moving with practiced ease. The engine was overheating, and she found a leak in one of the hoses. She rummaged through her bag, pulling out duct tape and a small bottle of sealant. "This'll hold long enough to get you where you're going," she said, applying the makeshift fix. "But you'll need to see a real mechanic soon to replace the hose." Logan checked his watch again. "Will it run?" "Try it," she said, stepping back. He slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. Logan's shoulders visibly relaxed, and he let out a breath. "You're a lifesaver," Ellie grinned. "Just doing my job? Or part of it anyway." Logan stepped out, pulling a wallet from his pocket. "How much do I owe you?" Ellie shook her head. "Don't worry about it. You were in a bind. Consider it a favor." His brows furrowed. "A favor? You just saved me from losing a multimillion-dollar deal. I can't let you walk away with nothing." "Multimillion?" Ellie raised an eyebrow, but she waved a hand dismissively. Seriously, it's fine. Good luck with your meeting. Before Logan could argue further, Ellie slung her bag over her shoulder and walked back down the road, disappearing around the bend. Logan arrived at his meeting just in time, sealing the deal with his investors. But even as the celebratory handshakes and congratulations filled the room, his mind kept wandering back to the girl with the confident smile and grease-streaked hands. The next morning, he made a decision. Ellie had helped him without expecting anything in return, but he wasn't the kind of man to let kindness go unrewarded. Ellie was back at the garage, under the hood of an old pickup truck, when the low hum of an engine caught her attention. She glanced up to see a black luxury SUV pull into the lot. Her boss, Hank, stood straighter, wiping his hands on a rag. "Ellie," he called. "Looks like you've got a visitor." Logan stepped out of the SUV, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete. He looked entirely out of place among the grease and tools, but his expression was warm. "You again?" Ellie said, smirking. "Car break down already?" Logan laughed. "No, the car's fine, thanks to you. I'm here for something else." Before she could respond, he gestured toward the SUV. A man in a tailored suit emerged, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. "This is my lawyer," Logan said. "And he's here because I owe you something." Ellie blinked, confused. "Your lawyer? For what?" Logan smiled. "For changing my life yesterday. And now I'd like to change yours." Ellie squinted, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Change my life?" she repeated. "Listen, Mr. Price." "Logan," he corrected gently. "Logan," she said, wiping her hands on a rag. "I just fixed a hose and tightened a belt. That's hardly life-changing." Logan chuckled, shaking his head. "You don't understand. If you hadn't stopped to help me, I would have missed a meeting that secured funding for a project I've been working on for 2 years. And that project is worth millions. So yes, what you did was life-changing." Ellie shifted uncomfortably, unused to this level of attention. "Okay, well, I'm glad I could help, but I didn't do it for a reward. I'm not that kind of person." Logan's lawyer, a tall, serious-looking man, stepped forward and opened the briefcase. Inside was a stack of documents and a check. "Regardless of your intentions," Logan said, "I want to make sure your kindness doesn't go unnoticed. This is a check for $50,000. Consider it a thank you." Ellie's mouth fell open. $50,000? Are you serious? Completely. She stared at the check, her heart racing. That's too much. I can't accept that." Logan smiled, his tone firm but kind. "You can. And you will. But that's not all." "Not all," Ellie echoed, feeling like she was in some kind of surreal dream. Logan gestured to the documents. "I did some digging. You're talented, hardworking, and from what I hear, you've been keeping this garage afloat almost single-handedly. I also found out it's been struggling financially." Ellie's stomach twisted. "How do you know about that?" Logan shrugged. "I have resources. And when someone like you goes out of their way to help a stranger, I believe it's worth investing in them." He pointed to the papers. "These are partnership agreements. I want to buy into this garage and make you part owner. You'll have access to more tools, better equipment, and the freedom to take on bigger projects." Ellie took a step back, her hands shaking. "This is insane. You don't even know me." Logan tilted his head, his expression softening. "I know enough. I know you could have kept walking yesterday. You could have charged me a fortune knowing I was desperate. But you didn't. You chose to help, no strings attached. The world needs more people like you, and I want to see you succeed." Ellie's mind raced. Her whole life had been a series of uphill battles, struggling to keep the garage open, barely scraping by. And now, out of nowhere, this man was offering her a way out, a chance to breathe. She swallowed hard, tears threatening to spill. "Why are you doing this?" Logan smiled. "Because someone once did the same for me when I was at rock bottom. Now, I'm paying it forward." Over the next few weeks, Ellie's life transformed. The garage underwent renovations, new tools and equipment arrived, and customers started pouring in thanks to Logan's connections. Ellie found herself busier than ever, but for the first time, she didn't feel overwhelmed. She felt empowered. One evening, as she locked up the garage, Logan pulled up in his car. He stepped out, leaning casually against the door. "How's the new setup treating you?" he asked. Ellie smiled. "It's incredible. I still can't believe this is real." Logan nodded. "You deserve it." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Ellie turned to him. "Why didn't you just write me a check and move on? Why go through all this trouble?" Logan's eyes met hers, his expression sincere. "Because you didn't just fix my car, Ellie. You reminded me that there are still good people in this world. And sometimes those people need a little push to reach their full potential." Her chest tightened at his words. For so long, she had felt unseen, her efforts unappreciated. But now, standing here, she realized that her simple act of kindness had unlocked a future she'd never dared to dream of. Ellie's life had indeed transformed, but it wasn't just about the garage or the money. It was about the sense of purpose she'd found. Logan had opened a door she didn't even know existed, and every day brought new opportunities that seemed almost too good to be true. Yet it still felt incomplete. Weeks passed, and Logan remained a regular presence. Sometimes he'd swing by to check on her progress, sometimes just to talk. Their conversations ranged from business strategies to childhood memories, and Ellie found herself looking forward to his visits more than she cared to admit. One evening, as she was finishing up some paperwork in the newly renovated office, Logan appeared in the doorway. His usual confident demeanor was tinged with something softer, almost hesitant. "Busy?" he asked, leaning against the frame. Ellie looked up and smiled. "Just wrapping up." "What's up?" He stepped inside, holding a small, neatly wrapped package. "I wanted to give you this." She raised an eyebrow, accepting the package. "What is it?" "Open it and find out," he said with a playful smirk. Ellie carefully unwrapped the paper to reveal a sleek, leather-bound journal. On the cover, in gold lettering, were the words, "Ellie's Big Ideas." "It's beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the smooth leather. "But why?" Logan sat down across from her, his gaze steady. "Because I see how much potential you have, Ellie. Not just with cars or running a garage, but with people. You have a way of inspiring trust, of making people believe in themselves. I think you could do more, dream bigger." Ellie's throat tightened. She opened the journal and found the first page already filled with Logan's handwriting. "Dreams are like engines. They need care, attention, and the right fuel to run. Never stop building, fixing, and dreaming." She blinked back tears and looked up at him. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep pushing forward," Logan said, his voice firm but kind. "The garage is just the beginning." Ellie nodded, a small smile breaking through her emotions. "I will. Thank you, Logan, for everything." He leaned back in his chair, a rare softness in his expression. "You don't have to thank me. You earned this." Months turned into a year, and Ellie's garage became the talk of the town. She hired staff, expanded her services, and even started hosting workshops to teach young women about car repair. She found herself on local news stations and in articles celebrating her journey from small-town mechanic to community leader. Logan remained a steady presence, though his visits became less about business and more about friendship, and something else neither of them dared to name. It wasn't until the night of the grand opening of her second location that everything came full circle. Ellie stood on a stage, thanking the crowd for their support, when her gaze found Logan's in the back of the room. Later, as the event wound down and the last of the guests left, Logan approached her. "You've come a long way," he said, his hands in his pockets. Ellie chuckled, her eyes sparkling. "I couldn't have done it without you." He shook his head. "No, Ellie, you could have. You just needed someone to remind you how capable you are." She stepped closer, her voice softer now. "Well, consider me reminded. But if I'm being honest," she hesitated, then took a deep breath. "It's not just the garage or the success that's made this year so incredible. It's having you in my corner." Logan's smile widened, and for the first time, his confidence faltered just slightly. "Ellie, You've been in my corner from the moment you stopped on that road. I think, he paused, gathering his thoughts. I think we make a pretty good team. Ellie's heart raced, but she grinned, her voice light and teasing. You're just realizing that now? Logan laughed, the sound warm and genuine. Better late than never. As they stood there, the weight of the past year between them, Ellie realized something. Her life had changed not because of a single act of kindness, but because of what came after. The courage to embrace the unknown, to trust, and to dream bigger than she ever thought possible. And in that moment, as Logan took her hand, she knew that this was just the beginning of something even greater.
It was a stormy afternoon, and the bustling city streets were drenched in chaos. Sarah, a 23-year-old waitress, hurried through the downpour, her flimsy umbrella barely holding up against the wind. She was late for her shift at a rundown cafe, a place where her dreams of a better life seemed to be slipping further away with every coffee cup she served. The cafe was nearly empty when she arrived, except for a man sitting alone in the corner. He was dressed in a tattered hoodie, his face hidden beneath a baseball cap, and a pair of crutches leaned against his table. Something about his hunched posture made Sarah pause, but the bell on the counter jingled impatiently, snapping her back to reality. "Hey, Sarah, tables aren't going to serve themselves," barked her boss. She nodded, quickly tying on her apron and grabbing a tray. As she approached the man's table, she noticed his hands were trembling. His coffee was untouched, and a map was spread out in front of him, marked with what looked like desperate scribbles. "Is everything okay, sir?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. He looked up, and for a moment their eyes met. His were deep and weary, a storm of emotions swirling behind them. He hesitated, then spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "I'm trying to get somewhere, but I think I've lost my way." Sarah glanced at the map. It was clear he wasn't from around here. The address he'd circled was on the outskirts of the city, nearly impossible to reach without a car, and she could tell he didn't have one. "I'm off after my shift," she said impulsively. "I could give you a ride if you'd like." The man's eyes widened in surprise. "You do that? For me?" She shrugged, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Why not? You look like you could use a break." As the hours passed, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the man's story than he was letting on. When her shift ended, she found him waiting by the door. His crutches clattered slightly as he adjusted himself. "You don't have to do this," he said as she helped him into her beat-up car. "I know," she replied simply. The drive was quiet at first, the only sounds coming from the rain pounding against the windshield. Finally, she broke the silence. "So, why are you heading to this place?" The man hesitated before answering. "It's complicated. Let's just say it's important." Sarah didn't press him, sensing he wasn't ready to share more. But when they reached the address, a dilapidated building with boarded-up windows, her curiosity got the better of her. "This is it?" she asked, incredulous. "Yes," he said, his tone resolute. "Thank you for bringing me here." He struggled to get out of the car, his movements labored. Sarah instinctively rushed to his side, offering her arm for support. As they approached the building, he suddenly stopped and turned to her. "You've already done so much for me," he said, his voice trembling. "But I need one more favor." "What is it?" she asked, her heart pounding. "Wait here for me," he said. "If I'm not back in 10 minutes, leave. No matter what." The tension in the air was palpable as Sarah watched him disappear into the shadows. Minutes felt like hours, and her mind raced with questions. Who was this man? What was he doing in a place like this? And why had he asked her to wait? When 10 minutes passed, and he didn't return, Sarah's instinct screamed at her to drive away. But something inside her couldn't leave him behind. Gripping her umbrella tightly, she stepped out of the car and made her way toward the building. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay. She followed the faint sound of voices, her heart pounding louder with each step. Peeking around a corner, she saw the man in the hoodie facing a group of rough-looking individuals. They were arguing, their voices growing heated. Suddenly, one of the men lunged at him, and Sarah's blood ran cold. Without thinking, she grabbed a broken piece of wood from the floor and charged into the room. "Hey, leave him alone," she shouted, her voice echoing through the empty space. The men turned to her in surprise, but her unexpected courage gave them pause. Sensing the momentary distraction, the man in the hoodie seized the opportunity to grab what looked like a small, metallic case from one of the men and bolted towards Sarah. "Run!" he yelled. They burst out of the building, the sound of angry shouts and pounding footsteps behind them. Sarah fumbled with her car keys, her hands shaking, but they managed to dive into the car just as the men reached the parking lot. "Go! Go!" he shouted. The tires screeched as she slammed on the gas, the car fishtailing on the wet pavement. They didn't stop until they were miles away, the city lights a distant blur behind them. Breathing heavily, Sarah turned to the man. "What the hell was that?" He held up the metallic case, his hands still trembling. "It's a long story." Over the next few hours, the man revealed the truth. His name was Daniel, and he wasn't just some drifter. He had once been a wealthy businessman, but a series of betrayals had left him penniless and disabled. The men they had encountered were former associates who had stolen something priceless from him, evidence that could restore his name and fortune. "And now you've risked your life for me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't even know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Sarah said, though her heart was still racing. "I couldn't just stand by and do nothing." The next morning, Sarah woke to the sound of her doorbell. She opened it to find a man in a sharp suit holding a briefcase. "Miss Sarah Bennett?" he asked. "Yes. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Daniel Carter," he said, handing her an envelope. Inside was a check, a staggering amount of money that made her knees weak. This is a mistake," she stammered. "I can't accept this." But the lawyer shook his head. "Mr. Carter insists. He says you saved his life, and he wants to give you the chance to change yours." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she realized the magnitude of what had happened. In helping a stranger, she had unknowingly altered the course of her own destiny. Sarah's hands trembled as she clutched the check, her mind spinning. The figure written on it was not just enough to pay off her mounting debts, but also enough to start the life she'd only ever dreamed of. Yet, beneath the overwhelming gratitude was a twinge of disbelief. She had simply acted on instinct, driven by compassion. How could that warrant such a reward? She looked up at the lawyer, who stood patiently as if anticipating her hesitance. "I don't think I deserve this," she said finally, her voice shaky. "What I did for him wasn't about money. I just wanted to help." The lawyer gave her a small, knowing smile. "That's precisely why he's doing this. Daniel doesn't believe in leaving kindness unanswered. If you'd like to discuss this further, I'm happy to arrange a meeting." Sarah nodded, still dazed. "Please, I'd like to see him again." Later that day, the lawyer arranged for a car to pick her up. Sarah had no idea what to expect. The last time she'd seen Daniel, he was battered, vulnerable, and on the run. Now, as the sleek black car pulled up to a towering glass skyscraper in the heart of the city, she felt an uneasy mix of awe and intimidation. The receptionist greeted her warmly and escorted her to a private elevator. As it ascended, Sarah's palms grew clammy. When the doors slid open, she stepped into a luxurious office lined with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. "Sarah," a familiar voice called. She turned to see Daniel standing by a massive oak desk. He was unrecognizable. His crutches were gone, replaced by a sleek cane, and he wore a tailored suit that seemed to exude confidence. But his eyes, warm and grateful, were the same as the ones she'd seen that stormy night. "You clean up well," she said with a nervous laugh, trying to mask her discomfort. He chuckled, crossing the room to greet her. "Thanks to you, I had the chance to clean up at all." Daniel explained everything over coffee. The evidence Sarah had helped him recover had exposed his former associate's corruption, clearing his name and restoring control of his company. He'd spent the last few weeks rebuilding, but he hadn't forgotten the stranger who had risked her life for him. "I owe you more than I can ever repay," he said. "That check is just the beginning." Sarah shook her head. "Daniel, I don't want to be someone who takes advantage of your kindness. I didn't help you for a reward." "I know," he said, his gaze unwavering. "But think of it as an investment. You've proven you're someone who helps others even when it's hard. Imagine what you could do with the resources to make a real difference." His words hung in the air, sinking deep into Sarah's heart. For years, she had dreamed of a life where she wasn't just surviving. She wanted to build something meaningful, to lift others out of the struggles she knew all too well. Maybe this was her chance. Over the next few months, Sarah's life transformed in ways she never imagined. She used part of the money to buy a modest apartment, her first real home in years. But the majority of it went into a passion project she had dreamed of for years, a community center for underprivileged youth. The center, named Second Chances, quickly became a safe haven for children and teens in the city. Sarah poured her heart into it, using her own experiences to connect with those who felt forgotten by society. She hired counselors, teachers, and volunteers, ensuring the center offered not just a place to escape, but also a path to a better future. Daniel visited often, his presence a reminder of the unexpected bond that had brought them together. Despite his wealth and status, he seemed most at ease when he was at the center, talking to the kids or helping Sarah organize events. One day, during a particularly hectic fundraiser, Sarah pulled Daniel aside. "Why are you still helping me?" she asked, her tone curious rather than accusatory. "You've already done more than enough." Daniel smiled, leaning lightly on his cane. "Because helping you helps me. Watching you take this opportunity and turn it into something that changes lives. It's the most fulfilling thing I've ever been part of." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She had spent so long thinking of herself as small, insignificant. But now, standing beside Daniel and seeing the bustling community center around her, she realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was making a difference. Months turned into years, and Sarah's story became a beacon of hope in the city. Second Chances expanded, opening new branches and reaching even more people. Sarah became a symbol of resilience and compassion, her name synonymous with the idea that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple into something life-changing. Daniel remained a steadfast supporter, but their relationship evolved into something deeper. What had begun as a chance encounter became a partnership built on trust and mutual respect. Over time, they grew closer, their shared mission forging a bond that neither had anticipated. One evening, as they stood on the balcony of the community center overlooking a city illuminated by twinkling lights, Daniel turned to Sarah. "Do you ever think about that night we met?" he asked. "Every day," she admitted. "It feels like a lifetime ago. Because of you, it's a lifetime I wouldn't have had," he said, his voice soft. "You didn't just save me, Sarah. You gave me a reason to believe in people again." She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "And you gave me a reason to believe in myself." As they stood together, the noise of the city fading into the background, Sarah realized that the life she had always dreamed of wasn't about the money or the success. It was about the people she had touched and the journey that had led her here. And for the first time, she felt truly at peace. Layla Gray didn't hear the knock at first over the sound of rain pounding against her window. She sat on her couch, a single dim lamp illuminating the otherwise dark room, her hands clutching an overdue rent notice. The month had been brutal. Double shifts at the diner, broken-down car, and a manager who thought overtime pay was a mythical concept. The knock came again, sharper this time. Layla froze, her heart skipping a beat. She lived alone in a crumbling studio apartment where unexpected visitors were a rarity and rarely a good sign. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice tinged with unease. "Miss Gray," a man's voice replied, formal and measured. "My name is Nolan Vance. I'm here on behalf of Daniel Cole." The name didn't register immediately. She wasn't sure if she should open the door, but something about the man's tone, or the way he said Daniel's name, made her stand. Slowly, she cracked the door open to reveal a sharply dressed man holding a briefcase, his expression both professional and unreadable. "Who?" she asked, frowning. "May I come in?" Nolan asked, glancing at the rain-soaked hallway. Layla hesitated. She was exhausted, and this was far too strange. But curiosity edged out caution. She stepped aside, motioning for him to enter. "Daniel Cole," Layla repeated as Nolan took a seat at her rickety kitchen table. "I don't know anyone by that name." You met him recently, Nolan said, opening his briefcase. A few days ago, outside Jefferson Hospital. It clicked. The man in the wheelchair. She remembered the rain, the struggle, and the way he had quietly thanked her for a ride. What about him? Nolan pulled out an envelope and slid it across the table toward her. Mr. Cole insisted this be delivered to you in person. Layla stared at the envelope, her brow furrowing. Why? Because, Nolan said with a faint smile, your kindness meant more to him than you realize. Layla hesitated, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, written in neat, deliberate handwriting, and a check that made her blink in disbelief. Wait, is this a joke? She asked, her voice rising. This can't be real. I assure you it is, Nolan replied calmly. Mr. Cole has entrusted this to you as a gesture of gratitude. Gratitude? She echoed, her voice nearly breaking. I gave him a ride. That's it? Nolan's expression softened. To you, it may have been a small thing. To him, it was life-changing. Layla's fingers tightened around the check as the numbers stared back at her. Far more than she'd ever seen in her life. She felt a sharp pang in her chest, a mix of shock, confusion, and guilt. This has to be a mistake, she stammered, sliding the check back toward Nolan. I don't deserve this. I didn't do anything. Nolan leaned back slightly, his calm demeanor unwavering. Miss Gray, Mr. Cole specifically chose you. It's not about what you did. It's about who you are. Layla's laugh was bitter, her exhaustion and frustration bubbling to the surface. Who I am? I'm nobody. I'm drowning in bills, my car's falling apart, and my manager treats me like a doormat. You got the wrong person. Nolan's eyes softened. Mr. Cole doesn't think so. This isn't charity, Miss Gray. It's gratitude. He wanted you to have a chance to change your life, the way you unknowingly changed his. Layla stared at the letter again, the words blurring as her emotions churned. Daniel had written about how invisible he felt, how her small act of kindness had reminded him that he mattered. She felt the weight of his trust pressing on her, heavy and humbling. I need time to think about this, she murmured finally. Nolan nodded. Of course, but Mr. Cole's health is fragile. If you have questions or wish to speak with him, I suggest you do so soon. With that, Nolan stood, collecting his briefcase. As he left, Layla sat frozen at the table, staring at the check and wondering how a single moment had led to this. The next morning, Layla's routine felt surreal. The cramped diner where she worked seemed even dingier than usual, the voices of customers fading into the background as her mind replayed the previous night. By the time she dragged herself home that evening, her body ached, and her thoughts hadn't settled. She was about to collapse onto her couch when her phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, and for a moment, she considered ignoring it. But something made her pick up. Miss Gray, a faint voice asked. Yes, she replied cautiously. This is Daniel Cole. Layla's breath caught. I wasn't expecting. How did you get my number? Nolan, he said simply, a trace of humor in his tone. I hope you don't mind. No, it's just, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Daniel said gently. I just wanted to thank you. Again, Layla sank onto her couch, the fatigue of the day catching up with her. I don't understand why you're doing this. I gave you a ride. That's all. To you, it was nothing, Daniel replied, his voice tinged with something she couldn't quite place. But to me, it was everything. I've spent years feeling like a burden, like I don't matter. That day, you reminded me that kindness still exists, even when people don't have much to give. Layla's throat tightened. But I didn't do anything special. Sometimes, the smallest gestures mean the most, Daniel said. They spoke for a few more minutes, his words quiet but heartfelt. By the time the call ended, Layla felt a strange sense of warmth, along with the growing weight of the decision she needed to make. 3 days later, Layla found herself standing outside Jefferson Hospital, her nerves fraying with every second. She called Nolan to arrange the visit, unsure of what to expect, but feeling compelled to meet Daniel in person. The receptionist directed her to his room, and with a deep breath, she knocked softly on the door. Come in, Daniel's voice called faintly. Layla stepped inside, her eyes immediately landing on the man she'd only glimpsed briefly before. He was pale, his body thin and frail, but his smile was warm and genuine. "Layla," he said, his eyes lighting up, "I'm glad you came." She offered a nervous smile as she approached his bedside. I needed to see you. I still don't understand why you do all of this for me." Daniel gestured for her to sit, his movements slow but deliberate. "I know it seems strange, but when you stopped that day, when you helped me, it reminded me of who I used to be, someone who believed in paying kindness forward." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. "You didn't just help me get to the hospital," he continued. "You gave me a moment of dignity, a reminder that I wasn't invisible. And I wanted to give that back to you." Layla looked away, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "I don't know if I can accept this. It feels too much." Daniel smiled softly. "Then don't think of it as a gift. Think of it as a chance to start fresh, to build something better. You deserve that." Over the next few weeks, Layla wrestled with her decision. The money could solve so many of her problems, but it also felt like a responsibility she wasn't sure she was ready for. But as she thought about Daniel's words, about his belief in her, she began to see it differently. This wasn't about deserving or earning. It was about honoring his trust. Slowly, she started to make changes. She paid off her overdue bills, fixed her car, and began volunteering at a local shelter, inspired by Daniel's example of paying kindness forward. Each step felt like reclaiming a part of herself she'd lost along the way. Layla's life began to shift in ways she hadn't imagined. The financial relief brought a sense of stability she hadn't felt in years, but it was the emotional weight of Daniel's gesture that truly spurred her forward. Her volunteering at the shelter quickly became more than just a way to give back. It was a place where she connected with others who, like her, had once felt unseen and forgotten. Over time, she became a vital part of their community, organizing food drives, coordinating donations, and listening to stories that reminded her how powerful even the smallest acts of kindness could be. But not everything came easily. At the diner, whispers started circulating among her coworkers. A few had noticed her fixed car, her lighter demeanor, and the subtle but noticeable improvement in her wardrobe. "Guess you found yourself a sugar daddy," one of the waitresses joked, her tone more biting than playful. Layla ignored the comment, but it stung. She wasn't ashamed of Daniel's gift, but she wasn't ready to explain it either. How could she make them understand that this wasn't about money? It was about hope. One day, as Layla was finishing her shift, a man walked into the diner and sat at the counter. He was tall, with sharp features and an air of confidence that set him apart from the usual crowd. "Coffee black," he said, flashing her a polite smile. Layla poured the coffee, her curiosity piqued. "First time here?" He nodded. "I heard about this place from someone who said you make the best pie in town." Layla smirked. "We might. Depends on who told you." The man chuckled. "Nolan Vance." Her hand froze mid-pour, her heart skipping a beat. "You know Nolan?" "Yes. I'm a friend of Daniel's." He extended a hand. "Jordan Price." Layla hesitated before shaking it. "Layla Gray. What brings you here?" Jordan's expression softened. "Daniel asked me to check in on you. He's been talking about you a lot lately." Layla felt a warmth in her chest, though it was tempered by concern. "How's he doing?" Jordan's smile faltered. "He's hanging in there, but his condition's getting worse." The words hit her harder than she expected. She had only met Daniel once since that first encounter, but the bond they'd formed in such a short time felt profound. "I want to see him," she said quietly. "Good," Jordan replied. "He like that." Layla visited Daniel the following week, bringing along a small potted plant she'd picked up from a local shop. It wasn't much, but she wanted to brighten his hospital room. When she walked in, Daniel's face lit up. He looked thinner than before, his skin paler, but his smile was as warm as ever. "Layla," he said, his voice weak but filled with genuine joy. She set the plant on the windowsill and pulled a chair to his bedside. "I figured this place could use a little life." Daniel chuckled softly. "You've already brought plenty of that." They talked for hours about everything and nothing. Layla told him about her work at the shelter, the new friendships she was forming, and how much his gift had changed her perspective. Daniel listened intently, his eyes filled with pride. "I knew you'd do something amazing," he said. "I just needed to give you the chance." Layla felt tears prick at her eyes. "You've done more for me than I can ever repay." "You've already repaid me," Daniel replied, "just by being who you are." As Layla's life continued to improve, she couldn't escape the memories of her struggles. The nights spent crying in the dark, the humiliation of begging her landlord for extensions, the constant ache of not knowing if she'd make it through another month. One evening, as she sorted donations at the shelter, she came across a young woman with tear-streaked cheeks and a battered suitcase. "Are you okay?" Layla asked gently. The woman shook her head, her voice breaking as she said, "I don't know where else to go." Layla sat beside her, listening as the woman poured out her story. A string of bad luck, toxic relationships, and a crushing sense of failure. It was like hearing her own story from years ago. "You're not alone," Layla said firmly. "And you're not invisible. You gonna get through this?" The woman's tears slowed as she looked at Layla with a glimmer of hope. That night, Layla realized that Daniel's kindness had created a ripple effect. His gesture had changed her life, and now she was in a position to do the same for others. A month later, Layla received a call from Jordan. Daniel's condition had worsened, and he had been moved to hospice care. Layla visited him that same day, her heart heavy with dread. When she entered his room, he looked frilier than ever, but his eyes still held the spark she'd come to admire. "Layla," he said, his voice barely a whisper. She took his hand, holding it gently. "I'm here." Daniel smiled faintly. "I have one last request." Layla's throat tightened. "Anything. Keep making the world a little brighter," he said. "Promise me?" Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. "I promise." Daniel passed away a few days later, leaving Layla with a profound sense of loss and an even stronger determination to honor his legacy. She continued her work at the shelter, expanding their programs and becoming a voice for those who felt unseen. The small house Daniel had left her became a sanctuary for people in need, a place where kindness and second chances thrived. Through her efforts, Layla saw firsthand how one act of kindness could ripple outward, touching countless lives. And every time she felt doubt creeping in, she remembered Daniel's smile, his unwavering belief in her, and the promise she'd made.